Okay, so Broker Relationship Act. You know, I've read through this. I actually didn't create this slide deck, so you're going to see Tasha did, and you're going to see a lot of her flair in this.
I tried to make it fun, guys.
So I do appreciate her putting it together. And first time I read through it, it was like, oh yeah, I know this, I know this, I know this, I should know this, I do know this. This is really cool. And then I went back through and I read it again, and I was like, okay, this is actually really interesting. And the more I read it, and so we don't think about, in our real estate career, we don't ever think to ourselves, hey, this is Title 59, 858, 351 through 363, so this is very important. We don't memorize those different things, right? But this is our kung fu. Right? This is, I believe, as I was reading through this, and I became more, I started realizing part of the confidence I have in what I do every day is that I do know this stuff. And I do understand it. And so when somebody calls me and asks me a question, I'm able to operate within the confines of what I know, right? When you're, everyone here has played sports or some sort of game at any point in time, right? When you're playing a game, whether it be baseball or Monopoly or a video game or whatever game it is or every sport you're playing, you're not constantly thinking of the rules. Would everybody agree with that? Like when you're playing basketball, you're not thinking, okay, I can only use one hand at a time. You're just, it's a natural thing. You kind of know. You know that the square around is the out, right? You know that you got to put the ball in the hoop or you have to put it in the goal. These are all the things that you're thinking about. Not thinking about, but you just kind of naturally know the rules. When you're playing basketball, you know you can't punch the person in the face. If you're boxing, you know you can punch him in the face, right? But if you're boxing, you know you can't kick him in the face. But if you're UFC, you can kick him in the face, right? It's just, you kind of know the rules and you just kind of flow with them. And that's where learning stuff like this is important. Right? This is CE, it's continuing education. Everybody will get credit for it. It's required for your continuing education. That's why we're going through some of the required courses. We have all the fun electives, like when you were in high school, you still had to take math and science, but then you did like woodshop. This is not woodshop, this is math and science, okay? So let's jump into it. We're gonna go through definitions. This is like a state-approved course, so we are gonna go through definitions. So broker means a real estate broker, right? That's somebody, it can be an associate broker, which is associate broker is someone who's a salesperson. They're not the managing broker. It could be a sales associate or provisional sales associate authorized by a real estate broker to provide broker services. Right? So you might hear the term, you'll hear commercial agents refer to themselves as, well, I'm a broker. I'm the broker, I'm the broker. That is a term that can be used, but understand that they are in representation to their managing broker. So like, for example, I'm the managing broker. Peter, yes, a broker in charge. He is considered a broker. That's Tasha's thing. That's why I'm not talking in third person. It's a person to put it together. All right, buyer's agents, listing agents, yes. LRE real estate agent provides buyer's agents with permission to provide services to client, making them a broker, right? So in the state of Oklahoma, you cannot sell real estate without a broker license, which means that every sales associate hangs their license underneath a broker, which is why technically they say every listing, every contract is actually under the managing broker, AKA me. It's why, like with the new rules, that anything within the brokerage, you can show any listing within the brokerage without getting a touring agreement or a buyer brokerage service agreement, because I work for this seller and you are therefore work on my behalf. That make sense? So admin staff, yes, admin staff that hold real estate licenses through, and they have them hung with LRE Realty, have a permission to provide broker services as well. That's why our transaction coordinators at LRE Realty all have their license. So that way they can manage a transaction, they can answer every question, and once again, they're representing me in the transaction, which is why we talk very, very often. So, all right. Broker services means those services provided by a broker to a party in a transaction. And then what's a transaction? Any activity that's buy, sell, lease, option for real estate. It could, but we're not limited to those things, right? If you are doing marketing analysis, you're touring properties on behalf of someone, and you're doing a BPO, a broker market analysis, you're doing a CMA, like an in-person CMA to provide, not an appraisal, but you're providing an opinion of value. That is considered a real estate service. All right? Anytime that if there is a monetary attachment in some way, or it's dealing with real estate that you do not own, it could fall under a transactional situation. So different examples are showing a buyer a house, presenting comps to a potential seller, listing a home on MLS, assisting the buyers to write, negotiate a TRR, open houses, for example. It's why like sometimes there'll be unlicensed people might come to the house, you know, like that you may have like your kid come to an open house with you. They can hand out flyers, they just can't say what the square foot is, right? Because as soon as someone says, hey, what's the square foot? And an unlicensed person says, oh, it's 2,000 square feet, they are now providing broker services. So, a little bit something to think about, something to know. A party means a person who is a seller, buyer, landlord, tenant, a person who is involved in the option or exchange. Anyone involved is a party to a transaction. That is not the agent. So for example, in Oklahoma real estate contracts, agents are not a party to the contract. We're an agent, we're the broker in the contract, but we're not a party to it, which is why like when things go into mediation, we can't file for mediation and go to mediation. We can't file for dispute of earnest money because we're not a party to that. We might be able to do it on behalf, like, hey, we'll help you out, we'll do it, but we can't file and show up and go to court for our clients. You had a question?
With the new contracts and how a cooperative compensation agreement is attached, it can be attached now to the contract?
Correct. You're still not a party to it though. Yeah, because it's very directly assigned to broker services. So the question being, since we're attaching a portion of the contract that says how we're getting paid, it's just transparency in that how the broker services are being paid for, but does not make us a party to the contract. Firm means a sole proprietor, corporation, association, or partnership. So LRE Realty is the firm in which the broker services are executed. Questions on all these amazing, wonderful terms? The thing is, though, I would recommend using those terminology. Right? I'm going to back up just for a second. You know, we hear them once, but calling something a transaction, right? That's important. Not calling it a deal, not calling it a contract. It's the transaction. The contract is the paper, right? The transaction is what is happening. Referring to when you're talking to a client, like using terms like all parties involved, and then explain to them what that is. It's your kung fu. It's bringing things into a legal term. Think about an attorney. If you were talking to an attorney and instead of saying, you know, the plaintiff, they said, oh, the person who did something wrong, and then, oh, the one that's the defensive guy over there, you wouldn't be like, okay, this guy doesn't know his legal terms, right? You want to hear like the plaintiff, the defendant, the judge, the jury, the other attorney. You don't want to hear suit guy defending the guy who's guilty guy, right? You want to hear the terminology. The same thing with us. The more professional we sound, the more comfortable our clients are going to be. So don't just gloss over the terms if possible. Brokerage duties responsibility. So these are all the things that a broker is responsible for. Treat all parties with honesty, exercise reasonable skill and care. So Oklahoma is a transactional state, which means that we have to treat all parties, not just your client. So we're held accountable by Oklahoma real estate law. We can't just protect our seller and not treat the buyer fairly. And vice versa, the other agent can't do the same thing. So how do we do that? Some of the ways we're doing that is receive all written offers and counteroffers in writing. Right? Any offer needs to be in writing. That's contractual. Too often, I hear of something going sideways because somebody verbally accepted something. I get a call. It's usually once a quarter. Now it's not as much as it used to be because we talk about this all the time. But once a quarter, I'll get a call from an agent that says, hey, we were negotiating back and forth with the seller, and the seller said that he was going to, we come to an agreement, and then this morning the agent told me that they accepted another contract. I'm like, okay, did you get a signed counteroffer? No. We were just verbally because we were just kind of working out like the fence situation, so nothing was in writing. Then you don't have a contract. It's not in writing. On the flip side, somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm willing to offer $180,000 for this house, cash offer, closing in 2 weeks. Do you think your seller would accept? And you'll say, I'll call and find out. You call your seller, and he goes, yeah, I'll accept that. You call the guy back, he goes, fantastic. 180,000, boom, boom. I'll get it written, sent over to you. I'm going to call my agent, and you get an offer for 170,000. And you're like, well, he already knows you'll accept 180, so he wants to see if you'll accept 170. Did you do your client a service? But that happens. You think it's the other way that you can handle when somebody calls you, like these investors that call you and says, hey, I'm looking to see if you're a sub-2 offer. Put it in writing. Like, well, call them first and ask them if they'll accept a sub-2. Put it in writing. I said, I have to present, state of Oklahoma, I have to treat all parties fairly, and I've signed an agreement with my seller that states that I will reduce all offers and counteroffers in writing, so please put that in writing, and I'll send it over. I have not a problem sending it over. That will save you a lot of time on the phone. And they won't report you for not submitting in all offers, which does happen. Right? Reduce all offers and counteroffers to a written form. Again, we're talking about the same thing. Present timely all written offers and counteroffers. There are agents who get fined hundreds and thousands of dollars because they do not do this. They receive a counteroffer and they don't submit it to the seller for like 2 days later. Tara got her real estate license because of this. You guys haven't heard the story. We did not get the guy in trouble. However, we could have, because we went out to a house on a Thursday. We viewed it. It was over in Fox Lake. It was like 2001, 2002. That's 2002. And we went into this house. We looked at it. We loved it. It was a foreclosure. We put an offer. It was above asking offer. Filled the whole contract right there at the counter. Called the guy on Friday, no answer. Called the guy on Saturday, no answer. Called the guy on Sunday, see what's going on, no answer. Monday, we noticed it went under contract, so we kept calling the guy, called him up, and he said, oh my goodness, I totally forgot to submit your offer. I went to the lake. That could have gotten him fined, if not lost his real estate license, because we could have actually sued him if we wanted to, because he did not do his duties as an agent. Right? So getting these counteroffers doesn't mean that if you get an offer at 9 o'clock at night, you have to call your seller at 9 o'clock at night. But it doesn't mean you wait till 5 o'clock the next day to submit it either. There are suits out there where an agent did not submit, like it's signed, but they did not submit to the other agent, and the other agent went with another offer. And then they're like, well, no, we didn't receive that counteroffer. It doesn't matter that your seller docu-signed it at 9 o'clock in the morning. You didn't email it to me till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we accepted the other offer. Now you've got a whole bunch of parties pissed off at each other. So being present and being timely will save you a lot of trouble. So again, let's verbally offer to the seller so we won't waste any time. That's a no. It's my responsibility to get all offers and counteroffers written to present to the seller. It also is better in negotiations. Right? This isn't a negotiations class, but I want to explain to you, this is where I think it's not treating parties fairly. So let's say I'm negotiating with Sean, right? And I said, just counter back and forth me. Will you take 1,000? No. What will you take?
I'll probably take like 2,000.
2,000? How about 1,500?
No, don't think I want to do that, but I'll consider it.
Okay, how much will you take?
2,000.
2,000 again? Okay, what about 1,500? What about 1,700?
17, I'll think, yeah.
You think about 1,700? Yeah. So quickly did I do good for my client. But now if I go, hey Sean, will you take 1,000 for it?
No.
Okay. What will you take?
Maybe 1,700.
1,700, okay. And I go back to my client and I go, he might take 1,700. What do you think?
Okay.
Okay, you're good with that? Okay. There's a little bit of slowness involved, but have you ever had but if you're going back and forth, it's so easy for them just to do what we just did, right? Where you can go, well, I want 1,000, 1,700, blah, blah, but you go to somebody else and then it's like, well, no, I don't want that, I want this. I don't want that, I want this. I don't want that, I want this. Does that make sense? It slows the game down as well for your clients. It also makes sure that you're filling everything out correctly, not missing anything. All right, let's say the buyers are okay with just the roof being fixed. How many of you run into that one before? They call over and they say, well, we just want to make sure you're going to fix the roof. Put it in writing. Right? Well, before we fill out a TRR, they want to know if you'll fix the roof. Put it in writing. Right. Well, before we put an offer in on the house, they just want to make sure that the roof's going to be replaced. Put it in writing. Put in the offer. In the event that roof needs to be repaired, seller agrees to replace the roof. Put it in writing. Everything should be put in writing, because just because this is another issue I've handled, where when we went, I called the agent and I asked them if they were going to do the peer work, and they said yes, and then we submitted an offer, and now they're not going to fix it. I'm like, well, did you put it in writing? Well, no. I just called and asked them before we put an offer in if they would, and they said yes. Did you put it in writing? Well, no. Then there's nothing, you have not a leg to stand on. It's the same way for the commission stuff, and people are calling, I said, hey, stop calling the other agent and ask what they're paying. Because just because they verbally tell you something doesn't mean that that's actually what's going to happen. Right? You say, well, you said you'd pay 3%. Yes, but you also submitted an offer $200,000 off a $150,000 house. So there's no money left.
But that's not math.
Right? So put it in writing. Just put it in the contract, put it in writing, because unless it's in writing, it doesn't exist. Timely account for all money, property received by the broker. Somebody just lost their real estate license this year for this. Holding on earnest money, put it in their pocket, not delivering it. Sellers will lose, a buyer can lose out on a property if they give you the earnest money and you don't turn it in, you can be in trouble. It's one of the reasons that we don't do trust accounts. I'm trying to help you be timely, right? Again, this is something that's happened in the past. I just want to make sure that if you do receive funds, that you handle it in a timely manner. All right, so this is something that I am gonna read through this, not to be extremely boring, because I need to drill it home. Keep confidential information received from a party or prospective party confidential. The confidential information shall not be disclosed by a firm without the consent of the party disclosing the information, unless consent to the disclosure is granted in writing by the party or prospective party disclosing the information. The disclosure is required by law. Everybody say law.
Law.
Thank you. It's church. Or the information is made public or becomes public as a result of actions from a source other than the firm. The following information shall be considered confidential and shall be only the information considered confidential in the transaction. This is the information, like when we talk about doing a touring agreement, why we still have to have them fill out the broker service agreement, because this still applies. So this information, what a party or prospective party is willing to pay, more or less, what they're willing to do in financing, any motivating factors in the transaction, or information specifically designated as confidential by a party, unless that information is public. And we'll talk about all those different scenarios, right? So, for example, like this is how I know I didn't make these slides. But my buyers are offering 110, but I think they'll go up to 115. Like, this is where you're talking to your client. You're like, let's start at 110. But yeah, I'll pay up to 115. And you call the other agent and say, hey, they're at 110, but they don't want to lose the house. I think they'll go up to 115. And they counter back at 115. What do you think your clients are going to think? That you told them. What can you get in trouble for? Telling them.
So, okay, sorry.
Go.
So, because the brokers on both sides, I see where the fault is on the buyer's side right there, but is the listing agent in
Yes,
the wrong because he's like, dude, they said they'll take 115.
they are. Because we're a transactional state. So go back. We have to treat all parties fairly. So if another agent tells you something and says they'll go up to 115, you have to ask the question or text the question, get it in writing, is it okay if I share that with my seller? And if they say, yeah, you can share that with the seller. They don't want to lose it, they'll go up to 115, fantastic. Now you're off because you've gotten that permission. But if they don't give you that permission, so like some of these other scenarios up here, you have a client, they're going through divorce, and they're like, we have to sell, it's messy, I hate her face, she hates my face, we got to end this, and we got to sell this house now. We have to sell quickly. You have to are you okay with me sharing that information? Is it okay if I let people know you're motivated. But if you get a call and they're like, hey, just want to see if the seller's motivated, oh yeah, messy divorce. Right? Military, military is another one of those. You know, hey, why are they selling? Oh, he just got transferred.
Last minute.
Not even last minute, it could be any minute. But if you communicate like, hey, they're being transferred, that person, the seller, could say, well, I'm getting low offers because you're telling people I moved, and they think that I have to sell. Now, if you say, hey, if someone asks why you're selling, or can I communicate that you're PCSing? They might say yes. If they say, well, I'm highly motivated, I want to sell. Well, do you want me to share that?
For consent, can you just do it in text, or do you have to have them sign?
No, text would work. If you're getting something, some sort of, for my purposes, I would assume that yes, you can get it. You're getting something in writing. They're conveying to you. You don't have to have them sign something. Is it better to? Probably. Right? But I would not. But verbally, now it's a he said, she said situation. But if they say, hey, hey, would you mind emailing that over to me, just because I have to have that. I have to have that in writing that you consent to give me that information.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah. Right. The tenants had a baby, so no showings after 7. Again, it could be, oh, they have to sell because they need to move to a bigger house, or for whatever motivating reason. So this works directly, but it also works indirectly. You get to a house early, and the seller's leaving. And the seller is, they're throwing the kids in the car, and he looks over at you and says, man, I gotta get this thing sold. I would take $20,000 off if they would take it. That's when you have to go, can I communicate that to my client? And they'll probably be like, no, please don't. But if you just communicate that, you're in the fault. Even though you don't represent the seller. It's because you have to treat all parties fairly. Again, it's one of the reasons why agents get in trouble, is because they're still acting like we are a single party broker state where the client is, but that rule changed years ago. We're transactional. We have to treat all parties fairly, right? But what can you do? Well, for one, put it in the showing instructions. Just put no showing, just block it out. We do showing time. The clients, they're not doing any showings after 7. Just put it in there, right? If the home was a foreclosure, that's public knowledge. That's public records, right? I had a question once, and I always thought it was very interesting. We showed a house, or getting ready to show a house. I called the agent, and I said, hey, we're getting ready to show this house. He goes, have you Googled the house? I was like, no. He goes, you might want to Google it first. The doctor had murdered his wife in it, so. And it was like on a bunch of TV shows, mysteries, blah, blah, blah. And so that was something. He got consent for that. It was public knowledge, but he still got consent because they had 2 contracts go under, and the clients, and he didn't disclose it, even though it's public, it's on TV shows per se, you can Google it. He didn't have their permission. But after the second contract busted, because they were like, hey, my clients don't want to buy murder house, then he got permission, so every time he shared it. Make sense? So some of those situations, even though it's public because you Googled it, I would still go ahead and get permission. All right. There was a interesting, there's 2 stories nationally that don't pertain to our laws. No states have different laws, but suits came up. One was American Horror Story. The house from American Horror Story, the first season. The people who owned the house sold the house because they couldn't deal with all the fans climbing the fence, breaking into the house, taking pictures. So they sold it and didn't disclose to the new buyers why. The Breaking Bad house is the second one. Lady bought this house, she walks outside and there's a pizza on her roof. Apparently, I've never watched Breaking Bad, but in the movie, he gets mad and he throws a pizza up in the air and it lands on the roof. So fans love to drive by and throw pizzas on this lady's house. So she was filing suit because it was not disclosed to her that people threw pizzas at her house on a daily. So I think there's things that, like, when you come to a situation like that, the law might be a little gray. So then we just need to talk about it. And then best thing is to get permission. Right? Don't try to hide it, because it's when it comes to lawsuits, every attorney will tell you it's not what's right, it's not what's wrong, it's what you can prove. And if it can be proved that you had some knowledge that would cause an issue, that was treating a party unfairly because you had unfair knowledge, you will lose with a good attorney. All right. Disclosure information pertaining to the properties required, the Residential Property Disclosure Act. Right? This form right here, you cannot fill out. Not at all. It does not matter the capability of the person filling it out. I just did one, and the seller was 93. It took an hour. And I'm not like I'm trying to discredit her, but everything we had to talk about. She was very chatty. I actually enjoyed talking with her. But you might have this thing that say, well, I'm going to help her out. Because she was a little, all I did was I slid the little paper down, and she had to exit initial it. And we had to initial 4 or 5 times, because she's like, oh, I did the wrong one again. I did the wrong one again. And you might be tempted to go, oh, you just tell me the answers and I'll fill it out. You might be tempted to do that. But what happens when the house was actually her grandson cooked meth in the basement, and she gets to the meth part and says no, and you think she's just a sweet old lady, she would never lie to me. And then it comes out that it's a meth house, and she's like, oh, I didn't fill those out. My agent filled them out for me. Because technically, did you fill them out? I didn't understand the question. He filled it out. She filled it out. Right? Something is incorrect, and you're the one who filled them out. Doesn't matter if she told you the answers or not. He told you the answer or not. You filled them out. You're now liable. This is form you cannot fill out. I cannot stress that enough. Doesn't matter if it takes you 2 hours. You let them do it. And then you let them write what they want to write in. When it gets to little boxes, well, this happened in the house. Well, write down what happened. Well, should I put this? Write down what happened. There's a lawsuit that happened. And I've shared the story before, but I can't stress it enough since we're talking about this and disclosure. The seller, during the listing appointment, 60s, 70s, I say this because we always think the older people are so sweet, they're so nice. They were in the mid-60s, 70s, and they got to the part that says, hey, on flooding, when it rains, water goes to the fence line on the back of the property. It's like an acre property. It goes down the fence to the ravine and then down into the ravine. Do I need to disclose that? And she said, no, you don't need to disclose that. And they didn't. And then on a separate notepad, they wrote, agent said, don't need to disclose. House sells, clients moved in, it's raining, backyard turns into a small lake, back by the fence line, rushing water, because there's a culvert that the city installed 6 months earlier, where now all the water from the other side of the road comes under the road right there to go into the ravine by the side of the property. Sellers called the city goes, oh yeah, it can't be moved. The previous owner tried to get us to move it. He tried to file suit, it was dismissed. The culvert is city, it doesn't affect the property. The buyer goes, I wonder why they didn't tell me. I think I know why. Because when we moved into the house, there was one notepad left in a drawer. And it said, agent told me not to disclose. The only thing that was left in the house. Sweet old man tried to burn that agent to the ground. So I can't stress enough to say, well, do you think it's a disclosure issue? If you were purchasing the property, would you want to know about it? That's it. That's the answer. Well, my upstairs bathroom, the sink clogged and it overflowed. Do I need to disclose that? If you were purchasing the property, would you want to know that? Well, I don't know if it was mold, but we had it cleaned up. If you were purchasing the property, would you want to know about it? You don't answer the question. Did you have it tested? Well, no. Well, then you don't know if it was mold. Could be an answer. But it's better to say, if you were purchasing the property, would you want to know about it? If you were purchasing the property, would you want to know about it? Right? Because if you know about it, you have to disclose it. We had a property, it was actually one of Rhonda's listings, and then had so much mold in the property, it talked to you. You walk in, it said, hello, I've been here for years, I'm now sentient. In about another year, I'll have hands. It was, and we kept it, we told said, hey, you have to disclose this. And the seller was like, nah, I don't know if it's mold. I've never had a test. I was like, no, that's mold. So we did there's a form that there's a form at ORIC where it's a realtor disclosure, a broker disclosure form. And we disclosed, and we told them, hey, we're disclosing this. Because agents were showing up and they're calling us like, I think I almost died when I walked in that house. There was so much mold. Right? You might have a seller who just refuses to disclose. That does not obligate or take away your obligation to disclose if you know. Right? They tell you, oh, I've had peer work done. Okay, we need you to disclose. I was like, I'm not writing that down. Like, well, you have to. Like, well, I'm not writing it down. I don't want to. Okay, well, I do have to disclose that because I now have knowledge of that. Right? Because we have to treat both parties fairly. All right. Brokerage agreement, service provided to both parties in a transaction disclosure. So we are one of the states that does allow us to represent both sides. There are some states that do not allow that. We are a state that as a brokerage, we can handle both sides of the transaction. It's not just talking about you as an individual, like you have the buyer and you have the seller. If Kat has the buyer and Mark has the seller, that's considered a same brokerage transaction. Two different agents, but who does everything fall under? The managing broker. So it's considered the same.
The doctor and the nurses.
The doctor and the nurses. There you go. Right? So you have to click in-house transaction. Seller acknowledges and confirms that the broker is providing brokerage service to both parties to the transaction prior to parties signing the contract. Acknowledgement of disclosure of broker duties. They have to sign that. They have to acknowledge that. Again, it's very simple. All right, a broker who is providing service to both parties shall describe and disclose in writing, again, 858, 353, and they sign this form out, right? The disclosure to seller and buyer brokerage responsibilities. You're gonna check that little box, let them know that it's an in-house transaction, we're representing both parties. It's very easy to do by going back and saying we're a transactional state anyway. We'll always have to treat both parties fairly. Nothing really changes on your side because we still have to treat both parties fairly, right? All right, this is where if a broker wants to do less duties, so for example, you want to do an entry-only listing, there's a form, a document that actually outlines what services you are or not providing. You might have somebody, especially in today's world, you might have somebody call you and say, well, I don't want to be represented. You still have to write an offer for them. But if you're not going to do anything else for that party, you have to have that in writing, according to the state. It's like, well, I don't want to be represented. Well, come November, they're going to pass some laws about that to make it more clear. But if you don't plan on helping them with their part of the transaction, you have to have that in writing. All right? You just can't say, I'm just representing the seller. You're on your own, bro. All right? It has to be in writing. Same thing again with the seller. Seller says, like, I want to negotiate my own offers. Okay. Well, part of our contract states that I'll negotiate on your behalf, so you have to have something stating that is not, you're not doing that. That you won't be providing that service. Right? Again, written disclosure, subsection C. Duties of a broker following termination, expiration, or completion of performance. You still got to keep things confidential. Contract bust, you can't call them up and say, yeah, it bust because they're getting divorced and she's super difficult to deal with. Can't do that. Yeah, it busted because you want to do the inspections and that baby keeps crying every day. You still got to keep things confidential. You still got to keep things, not to disclose confidence, such as nasty divorce. I didn't even know that was down there. Maybe it's in my subconscious from reading it earlier. But the two things that I hear agents share the most when they're not supposed to is military moving and they're going through a divorce.
Why is the military moving a secret?
Because,
Protected class.
well, not so much as a protected class, but it's a motivating factor of why they have to sell.
Oh.
If you're being moved to Alaska, then you have an empty house. A buyer could think, oh, they have to move, so they have to sell because they're in a position where they have to sell.
Yeah.
So you can't tell them that. Yeah, unless you get permission. But we think of that. We think it's not a big deal. They're just moving. They're military. Not a big deal. It can be a very big deal if they think that they're getting low offers or they feel like they're treated unfairly because you disclose that information.
Oh, I have a question then.
Go.
So when you're of times. When they see military stuff, obviously, they see it, then they ask. So when they ask you, and you've heard that, do you?
Well, I mean, if they say you could, I don't know for sure. I mean, honestly, that you're in a gray zone.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, well, I mean, it could be that they're military moving. It could be that they're just moving closer to the base. It could just be say one house with a pool. We don't know. You know, that would be an assumption you're making, right? Now, if there's a sign, they leave their PCS order sitting on the table. I mean, I wouldn't read them, but if they put a note up, we're moving, right? So I think it goes into the situation where you, again, think, are you treating all parties fairly? If this was your client, would you want the other agent sharing that information? Right, it goes into like if you got to a house early and the seller was there and the seller told you something, ask yourself, if I was the seller's agent, would I have wanted that information disclosed to the buyer? That's a great like rule of thumb. Like, no, I don't think I would. If this was my client, would they want it disclosed?
Well, then I have a scenario.
Go.
Okay, so you show up early in your showing. The seller's still like trailing around.
Doing the thing.
And they tell you like, oh, I'm in the military after. So then you have to have that person's confidentiality and not tell your client. Or you can
Correct.
tell your
If they say I'm moving, you can say, oh, okay. Do you mind if I share that with the buyers?
You have to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work for them.
But you have to treat all parties fairly. And what they told you was could be seen as a motivating factor of why they're selling. If they say, I'm moving, I would take $10,000 off the house. And you just think to yourself, sweet, I got some good information. You have to ask, can I share that with my client? Because they just might have, you don't know the reason that they sold that. There's actually an agent that not only got fined by the commission, but also got in trouble with NAR for ethics because they held an open house, and everyone that came to the open house, they told them, oh, they're military and they're moving. They're military and they're moving. They're military and they're moving. And the client found out about it and reported him. Because the little doorbell cam or the inside cam caught him, and they were like, I don't know why she was telling everybody that came through the open house that I was moving. I think that's why I was getting low offers.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Like I said, you think you're doing a favor and you're not. Right? Don't think that people aren't shopping. These, again, I'm not beating up on investors, but these investors that call you and the first question they ask is, why are they selling?
You get that all the time.
It's a constant question. Well, it's a seller and they want to sell the property. They have the reason. Well, what do you think they'll accept this? Put it in writing. Well, I like to find out first. Put it in writing. Put it in writing. Put it in writing. Put it in writing. All right. Payment compensation. Just because you're not getting paid in a situation does not mean that you don't have to fulfill your obligations. All right. Also, in the event that a broker receives a fee or compensation from any party to the transaction based on a selling price or a lease cost transaction, such receipt does not constitute a breach of duty or obligation of any party in the transaction. What that is saying is,
Because the seller pays you.
correct, the seller is paying us.
To your buyer.
Correct. That make sense? My brain went on to why they're looking at passing a law that states in the state of Oklahoma sellers can pay buyer's agents. Because there are some laws that could say that is a breach of duty to your client. Because your client is a buyer, but the seller's paying you, so therefore you have some obligation to the seller. So that's why this law was written to say, like, no, it doesn't breach that. It also doesn't stop you from charging additional fees. For example, you charge 3% plus a $200 transaction commission. Or a seller, there's agents who will charge they may charge a commission plus an additional fee for marketing. Right? Just because you're charging one fee doesn't charge others. Somebody may call you and say, hey, will you do I'm thinking about listing my house, will you do a market analysis? Well, I charge $100 per market analysis. I don't know why you do that, but there are people who do it. That doesn't say that you can't do that. Right? As long as it's in writing, you're covered. All right. Abrogation of common law principles of agency, remedies and cures. So what this is talking about, there used to be, this was actually taking an old law away. It took me a minute when I first read this morning to rehash my memory. We used to have fiduciary type responsibilities, and it removed that. Like when you hear people say, well, I have a fiduciary responsibility. We don't. It was repealed, per se, replaced with other responsibilities. All right. I'm trying to make sure I don't go over something that's already here. Okay. One of the things is, so the other parts that were repealed and replaced that aren't directly in this, so there used to be like laws that, like, let's say that agents used to, when I first got in real estate, for example, so those of you who may have somebody told you this, I see it here come over every now and then, say a seller has a rug on the floor, and underneath the rug is a giant stain on the floor. And the house sells, the seller leaves the rug, the buyer moves in, takes up the rug, big stain. Prior to this rule being changed, the agent was actually still responsible for that stain. They were considered, that was part of their fiduciary responsibility. That was part of their, I forget the term, I apologize, but they were still could be held liable for that.
Which agent of which side?
The seller, the selling agent. So even though you never lifted up that rug, you never knew what was underneath that rug, you were working as a single party broker, hence you were responsible for that as well. It's one of the reasons that law was changed, because how the heck are you supposed to know that there's a stain under there? I'm about to get to look up every rug. Trust me, because I remember asking those questions. Is there anything that we should know about? Right? You have a lot of rugs in this house. Is there anything we should know about? Is there anything hiding behind any walls? Anything that you need to disclose?
Why wouldn't it be the, like, if that was the case, it's not fair to any agent to be responsible. Why wouldn't it be the listing agent's problem?
It was the listing agent's fault, not the buyer's agent. It was the listing agent's fault. Even though the listing agent didn't know, there was like this single party responsibility that they had. And so they were also financially responsible. That's why they were like, well, I guess I'm paying to fix the floor, right?
But
So,
why would they just leave the rug?
because they're shady.
No. I get that it was like a jig, and I think it's funny how they got over it. But why would they leave it there if they were moving out? Anyway.
To hide it.
No, I don't think y'all understand.
I don't think we are. Yeah, they're acting like, oh yeah.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, why would the buyers be okay with the rug being there, like, for the final walkthrough? See, it would be like,
Probably because they, honestly, but I would think probably in a lot of situations, it's like, I'll just deal with it later. It's not a big deal.
okay, yeah, I guess.
I mean, I've got clients for that, like, hey, there's like a box of pots and pans. I'm like, okay, I'll come get clients' pots and pans. Like, they still closed on it, but I'm going by there later to pick up stuff as an agent just to try to help out.
Could have been
Right?
like an oversight.
Yeah, could be, or it could be hiding a stain. A broker may cooperate with other brokers in a transaction. It's in law. Broker shall not be an agent, subagent, or dual agent of an offer or subagency. Shall not make to other brokers. Basically, you can't have your license at two different brokerages as an agent. Right now, I as a managing broker, I can manage two brokerages out of the same office. For example, I now manage the property management company, but they're in a hall, they're in the same building. When they were in the building next door, even though like we're 3020 and they're 3000 and I can literally walk up, but then it was a hill, I couldn't manage it because it was actually a separate address. Right? But as an agent, you cannot, right? So like when you have someone that goes, well, I want to list with my sister and she's over here, can't you both list it? No, you cannot both list it. However, there are times where you could have a house listed for sale and somebody else could have it listed for lease. Now, I'm going to put that in the gray zone. I'll let the real estate commission come up with that, but I have seen that happen because there are two different activities. However, I would have in writing what happens when one of those actions happens. Hence, property goes under lease, then the listing agreement terminates. Property goes under contract, right to lease terminates. I've heard that. I know people do it. I'll have to actually get clarification on that, but I do know it happens because they're two different services. Nothing in this act shall prohibit a broker from entering into an agreement for brokerage services not enumerated herein, as long as the agreement is in compliance with this act or law. This is what I was talking about, where somebody may, I I used to do touring services, for example, when hospitals. They used to bring doctors in, OU Medical, and at the time when he was in position, he was always trying to woo doctors over. He was like, hey, we'll pay you like, I think like $1,000 to tour people around the city. $1,000 to do a tour for a day? I'll do that. And just drove them around the city, showed houses, this, that, and the other. But we had an agreement that let me do that. It went through the brokerage, because you just can't put it in your pocket. It's got to go through the broker. It has to be laundered, right? So all these services, somebody pays you a finder's fee. That's a broker service. It has to go through the broker. Somebody pays you for doing a CMA. Has to go through the brokerage. Anything that could be considered a real estate activity, right? I was showing them properties, homes, while doing the tour. I wasn't just Toro, where I just showed them, here's a park, here's Frontier City, here's a restaurant. We were actually also going into properties. They wanted me to show them potential places they could live. So I was doing real estate services, hence it had to go through the brokerage. Make sense? All right. A real estate broker and associates of a real estate broker are permitted under the provision of this title to use the word agent in the trade name as reference. You used to not be able to do that. Weird, right? Now you can. Yay, law. Right? A party to a real estate transaction shall not be, that's the word I was looking for, I knew it was in here somewhere, vicariously liable for acts or omissions of the real estate licensee who's providing broker services. So that goes both ways. If you don't do something right, the buyer or seller is not liable for your mistake. All right? So if you screw up, you can't like, it's my fault, your fault. Okay? So, here's an example that happened recently. Agent lists the property, puts in the legal description, puts in the address, lists the property. Property goes under contract. Property sells. Property closes. So buyer goes to title company. Title gets the mortgage inspection certificate. Ha ha ha, laugh, 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 drink the drink, eat the cookie, signed it without paying attention, right? 2 years later, they go to sell it. They thought they had a backyard. The backyard ended 1 foot beyond their porch. The previous seller still owned the other 50 feet of the yard. It was 2 parcels. He still owned it. He didn't sell it. Now, in this situation, the agent is not responsible for that act. Not vicariously liable. They sold him a property. They disclosed everything. Everything was there, right? There's another situation where agent bought a house in a neighborhood. The HOA was run by the builder, and at the end of it, and he decided, I don't want to manage an HOA. I don't want to have set up lawn care fees and pass it on to an HOA. So he separated all around the lake where all these houses were, he deeded every piece of property to the owners on a separate deed. Renata's smiling, I think you know about this guy. Property sold, and the guy thought he owned from his backyard to the lake. He did not. The previous seller did. And he's like, hey, I want this. And the seller's like, I'll sell it to you for 20 grand. He's like, well, you are in trouble because you didn't tell me. It was not our responsibility to disclose with you who owns the parcel behind you. It seems weird, but we're not vicariously liable. We sold the parcel that we had the legal description for. We posted the legal description. We don't sell properties based on address. We sell them based on legal description, right? It goes into the same thing. We've had a situation where a seller said, I own 15 acres, but I only want to sell 5. Agent went in and he posted the legal description for the 15 acres, not the 5-acre legal description. House went under contract. MLS said 5 acres, but what did they purchase? 15 acres. So who's vicariously who is liable? And the seller's not liable. The agent is liable for figuring out how to fix this.
How do you fix that?
A lot of work. I won't go into it. It took a lot of work. But we got it fixed. We got things remedied. We took care of the situation. But that's the thing is like, if we screw up, you don't get to call your seller and be like, hey, I wrote the wrong information in here and that's my fault. I wrote the legal description in there because they're not responsible for our mistakes. That make sense? That's why it's so important to understand, like, you can't pass the buck if you accidentally screw up. Each broker, associate, sales associate, professional sales associate shall be associated with a real estate broker. Already talked about that. You can't do stuff on your own, right? A real estate broker may authorize associates to provide broker services in the real estate broker under the Oklahoma real estate law. Again, I just talked about that. You all have my blessing. Go sell real estate. The end. Questions?